March 3rd, 1952, 2:17 a.m. Vincent DeLuca stood in the ruins of what was supposed to be his dream. The Stardust Club, his nightclub, the place that was supposed to open in 6 hours, looked like a war zone. Every window shattered, the bar riddled with bullet holes, the stage where he'd hired a 12-piece orchestra destroyed. 47 machine gun rounds fired through the front entrance, nobody hurt. That was the message. This wasn't about killing Vincent DeLuca. This was about teaching him a lesson. And the lesson was simple. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. You don't say no to Albert Anastasia. To understand how Vincent ended up standing in those ruins, you need to understand who he was and what he was trying to build. Vincent DeLuca wasn't a gangster. He was a legitimate businessman, or at least he was trying to be. Born in Red Hook, Brooklyn in 1919, Vincent grew up watching the neighborhood get carved up by the mob. His father ran a small grocery store and paid protection money to Murder Inc. for 20 years. Vincent watched his father's hands shake every time those men walked in, watched him count out money the family needed while gangsters in expensive suits took it and laughed. Vincent swore he'd never live like that. He'd never bow down, never pay tribute, never let fear run his life. After the war, Vincent came back from the Pacific with $8,000 in savings and a plan. He was going to open a nightclub in Greenpoint, a neighborhood on the border between Brooklyn and Queens. Not mob territory, or at least not clearly claimed territory. A place where working people could hear good music, have a decent meal, feel safe. A legitimate business built on legitimate money. He found the perfect location. A defunct textile warehouse on Franklin Street, right off McGuinness Boulevard. Big enough for 400 people, good bones, and the owner was desperate to sell. Vincent bought it for $12,000 using his savings and a loan from the manufacturer's trust company. He spent 8 months renovating. He hired legitimate contractors, paid them fair wages. He got proper permits from the city. He wasn't cutting corners, wasn't bribing inspectors. Everything was legal. Everything was clean. By February 1952, the Stardust Club was almost ready. Vincent had hired a manager, Tommy Chen, a Chinese-American who'd run clubs in Manhattan. He'd booked entertainment, a jazz orchestra led by a trumpeter named Jackie Davis, a singer named Ruth Morrison who'd performed at the Cotton Club. He'd printed menus, bought china and glassware, installed a state-of-the-art sound system. The grand opening was set for March 3rd. Invitations went out to 500 people, local businessmen, city councilmen, reporters from the Brooklyn Eagle. This was going to be Vincent's moment, proof that you could succeed in New York without mob connections. Then, on February 26th, 1 week before opening, 3 men walked into the Stardust during final preparations. Vincent was on a ladder hanging light fixtures. Tommy Chen was at the bar doing inventory. The 3 men didn't knock. They just walked in like they owned the place. The one in front was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Vincent's entire wardrobe. His name was Anthony Coppola, though everyone called him Tony Shots because of what he did to people who crossed him. "Vincent," Tony Shots said, his voice friendly but his eyes dead. "Nice place you got here." Vincent climbed down from the ladder slowly. He'd grown up in Red Hook. He knew exactly who these men were and who they worked for. "Thanks," Vincent said, keeping his voice steady. "We're opening next week." "Yeah, we heard," Tony Shots said, looking around. "That's actually why we're here. See, this neighborhood, it's under the protection of certain people. People who make sure businesses stay safe, make sure nothing bad happens." Vincent felt his stomach tighten. Here it was, the same shakedown his father had endured for 20 years. "I've got insurance," Vincent said. Tony Shots smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Insurance don't stop fires, Vincent. Insurance don't stop accidents. But we do. For a reasonable fee." "How much?" Vincent asked. Tony Shots walked to the bar, ran his finger along the polished mahogany. "Nice wood. Be a shame if something happened to it. $500 a week." Vincent's hands clenched into fists. $500 a week was more than half his projected profit. That kind of payment would bleed the club dry within months. "I can't afford that," Vincent said quietly. Tony Schatz turned to face him. Then you can't afford to open. Vincent should have backed down right then, should have negotiated, should have found a compromise. But standing there in his club, the club he'd built with clean money and honest work, something in Vincent DeLuca snapped. Get out, Vincent said. Tony Schatz raised an eyebrow. What? Get out of my club. I'm not paying you a dime. This is a legitimate business, and you're not welcome here. The other two men moved forward, but Tony Schatz held up a hand. You sure about this, Vincent? Very sure. Now leave before I call the police. Tony Schatz stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled again, that same cold smile. Okay, Vincent. You made your choice. He walked to the door, then turned back. Just remember, when things go bad, and they will go bad, you had a chance to do this the easy way. The three men left. Tommy Chen came up beside Vincent, his face pale. Do you know who they work for? Vincent nodded. Albert Anastasia. Then you know what you just did. Yeah, Vincent said, his voice harder than he felt. I just told them no. Albert Anastasia in 1952 wasn't just another mob boss. He was arguably the most feared man in the American underworld. They called him the Lord High Executioner, the Mad Hatter, the one-man army. As the boss of what would become the Gambino crime family and the former head of Murder, Inc., Anastasia had personally killed an estimated 20 to 30 men and ordered the deaths of hundreds more. Anastasia wanted something, people gave it to him. When Albert Anastasia was insulted, people died. Anastasia had come to America from Italy in 1919, jumped ship in Brooklyn, and immediately fell into the world of organized crime. By the 1930s, he was running Murder, Inc., and the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. Murder, Inc. wasn't just muscle. It was a professional assassination bureau that killed people across the country with cold efficiency. Anastasia perfected the contract killing. You didn't know who was coming. You didn't know when. You just knew that if Anastasia wanted you dead, you were already a ghost. By 1952, Anastasia controlled Brooklyn's waterfront, ran gambling operations across the city, and had his hands. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. In everything from loan sharking to labor racketeering. The Greenpoint area, where Vincent had built the Stardust Club, was technically in the zone of influence Anastasia was expanding into. It wasn't firmly controlled territory yet, but Anastasia was making moves to claim it. Protection rackets were how you marked territory. You put your men in businesses, collected regular payments, and everyone knew whose neighborhood it was. Tony Schatz reported back to Anastasia the same day he visited the Stardust. They met at Anastasia's social club on Mulberry Street in Manhattan, a nondescript storefront that served as the nerve center for his operations. Anastasia was sitting at a table in the back, playing cards with three other men. He was 49 years old, broad-shouldered, with thinning gray hair, and the kind of face that never smiled with its eyes. He says no? Anastasia asked without looking up from his cards. Yes, boss. Told us to leave. Said he's running a legitimate business. Anastasia laid down his cards slowly. A legitimate business. In my neighborhood. Yeah, boss. Anastasia stood up. The other card players went quiet. Who is this guy? Nobody, boss. Vincent DeLuca. Parents ran a grocery in Red Hook. He's a veteran, served in the Pacific. Came back, bought this warehouse, turned it into a club. Everything legal, permits and all. He thinks he's clean. Anastasia walked to the window, looking out at Mulberry Street. You know what legitimate businessmen do, Tony? They pay taxes. They follow rules. They show respect to the people who run things. This Vincent, he paid his taxes? I assume so, boss, but he didn't show respect. He didn't show me respect. The room got colder. Anastasia's rages were legendary. Men had died for smaller insults. But Anastasia didn't explode. He just nodded slowly. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to wait until the night before his grand opening. You're going to take Paulie and Rocco, you're going to take the Thompson, and you're going to put 50 rounds through the front of that club. I don't want anyone hurt. I want the windows destroyed, the furniture wrecked, the place looking like a battlefield, but no bodies, not yet. And boss, what if he goes to the cops? Anastasia turned around. Then we find out if he bleeds legitimate blood or smart blood. What Vincent DeLuca didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that his refusal to pay protection had put him in an impossible position. In the world Albert Anastasia operated in, there was no such thing as a legitimate business that didn't pay tribute. Every bar, every restaurant, every club in the 5 boroughs paid someone. The Italians, the Irish, the Jews. It didn't matter who you paid, but you paid. That's how the system worked. By saying no, Vincent hadn't just refused to pay money, he'd challenged the entire structure of organized crime in New York. Over the next 5 days, Vincent continued preparing for opening night. He didn't tell anyone about Tony Schatz's visit. He didn't go to the police. What would he say? 3 men asked for protection money and I said no? The NYPD in 1952 was deeply corrupt. Half the cops in Brooklyn were on mob payrolls. If Vincent went to the police, word would get back to Anastasia within hours, and then things would get much worse. No, Vincent's plan was simple. He'd open the club, make it successful, prove that legitimate business could work. Once he had customers, once he had revenue, once he had connections with city officials, the mob would leave him alone. That was the plan. March 2nd, 1952, 8:00 p.m. Vincent was at the Stardust doing final preparations. The orchestra was rehearsing. Ruth Morrison was doing sound checks. Tommy Chen was training the waitstaff. Everything was coming together. Tomorrow night, 500 people would walk through those doors. Tomorrow night, Vincent DeLuca would prove you could succeed without bowing to gangsters. He worked until midnight, then went home to his apartment in Greenpoint. He slept the sleep of a man who thought he'd won. At 2:00 a.m., Tony Schatz, Paulie Rizzo, and Rocco Mancini pulled up outside the Stardust Club in a black Buick. The street was empty. The neighborhood was asleep. Tony Schatz opened the trunk and pulled out a Thompson submachine gun, the same kind of weapon Anastasia's Murder Inc. had used to kill Dutch Schultz, to kill dozens of men across the country. This one was loaded with a 50-round drum magazine. No silencer. Anastasia wanted people to hear this. Paulie kept watch. Rocco drove. Tony Schatz aimed the Thompson at the front entrance of the Stardust Club and opened fire. The sound was deafening. Glass exploded. Wood splintered. The Thompson's .45 caliber rounds tore through the door, through the windows, through the bar, through the stage. Tony Schatz swept the gun left to right, methodically destroying everything visible from the street. 47 rounds in less than 20 seconds. Then, silence. The Buick's tires squealed as they drove away. Lights came on in apartments. Someone screamed. Someone else called the police. By the time the cops arrived 8 minutes later, and if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. The street was full of people staring at the wreckage, and Vincent DeLuca, who lived 4 blocks away, was running toward his destroyed dream in his pajamas. Detective Frank Morello was the first investigator on the scene. He was a 15-year veteran of the NYPD, assigned to the Brooklyn North Detective Squad, and he'd seen plenty of mob hits in his career. This wasn't a hit. This was a message. Morello found Vincent sitting on the curb across from the Stardust, staring at the wreckage. His face was blank, shock written across every feature. "Vincent?" Morello asked gently. "You the owner?" Vincent nodded but didn't speak. "Can you tell me what happened?" "I wasn't here," Vincent said quietly. "I was home. I got a call from a neighbor." Morello looked at the damage. 47 shell casings on the ground, all .45 caliber Thompson rounds. The pattern of fire suggested professional work, someone who knew how to use the weapon. This wasn't random. This was targeted. "Vincent," Morello said, sitting down beside him, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Who did you refuse to pay?" Vincent turned to look at him. The detective's face was kind, but knowing. He'd been a cop long enough to understand how these things worked. "It doesn't matter," Vincent said. "Why not?" "Because you can't help me." Morello sighed. He knew Vincent was right. Even if Vincent named Albert Anastasia, even if he testified, even if they somehow got an indictment, it would go nowhere. Anastasia had the best lawyers in New York. He had judges on his payroll, and witnesses who testified against Albert Anastasia had a way of disappearing or changing their stories. "Look," Morello said, "I can file a report. I can investigate. But unless you're willing to tell me who did this, there's not much I can do. And even if you do tell me, there's not much I can do." Vincent stood up. "Then we're done here." By 6:00 a.m., word of the shooting had spread through the neighborhood. By 8:00 a.m., it was in the newspapers. The Brooklyn Eagle ran the headline, "Nightclub destroyed hours before grand opening. Police suspect mob. Involvement." By noon, Vincent had received 47 phone calls from people canceling their reservations for opening night. The orchestra canceled, Ruth Morrison canceled, even Tommy Chen, his manager, called to apologize and quit. "I've got a family, Vincent. I can't work for someone who's on Anastasia's bad side. I'm sorry." Vincent sat in his apartment alone, staring at the phone. He had insurance, but insurance wouldn't cover mob violence. He had a loan from the bank, but the bank would call it in if the club couldn't open. He had savings, but they were already exhausted from the renovation. And he had one other thing, a phone number. Before the war, Vincent had served in the Marines with a man named James Sullivan. Sullivan had come back from the Pacific and joined the FBI. He was now assigned to the New York field office, working on organized crime cases. Vincent had Sullivan's number written in a notebook. He'd never called it, never wanted to be the kind of man who needed federal help. But sitting in his apartment, looking at the ruins of his dream, Vincent picked up the phone. Sullivan answered on the second ring. "Sully, it's Vincent DeLuca." "Vincent? Christ, I haven't heard from you in years. How are you? I need help." Vincent told him everything. The visit from Tony Schatz, the demand for $500 a week, his refusal, the shooting. Sullivan listened without interrupting. When Vincent finished, Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. "You know who you're dealing with, Albert Anastasia." "Yeah, the Lord High Executioner himself." "Vincent, I'm going to be straight with you. We've been trying to build a case against Anastasia for 5 years. He's smart, he's careful, and everyone who works for him is terrified to talk. If you're willing to testify about that shakedown attempt, if you're willing to go on record, you could help us. But you need to understand what you're signing up for." "What am I signing up for?" Sullivan's voice was grim. "A target on your back. Even if we protect you, even if we put you in witness protection eventually, Anastasia has a long memory and a long reach. He's killed people in other states, other countries. If you do this, your life as Vincent DeLuca is over. You'll have to disappear, change your name, leave New York forever. And even then, you'll never be completely safe." Vincent closed his eyes. "And if I don't?" "Then you walk away. Close the club, sell the property, take the loss, and never open another business in New York. Live quiet, keep your head down, and hope Anastasia forgets about you. That's the choice, Vincent. Fight back and lose everything, or walk away and lose everything. Either way, you lose." Vincent thought about his father, thought about watching that old man's hands shake while he counted out protection money, thought about 20 years of fear, 20 years of bowing down, 20 years of letting gangsters take what they wanted. And he thought about the Stardust Club, the dream he'd built with clean money and honest work, now full of bullet holes. "If I testify," Vincent said slowly, "what happens to Anastasia?" Sullivan hesitated. "Honestly, probably nothing. We might get Tony Schatz on extortion charges, might get him to flip, but Anastasia's insulated. He never makes direct threats, never gets his hands dirty anymore. The best we can hope for is to make noise, put pressure on him, make him back off. It won't put him in prison, but it might save your life." Vincent made his decision. "I'll do it. I'll testify." "You sure?" Vincent looked out his window at Greenpoint, at the neighborhood where he'd tried to build something legitimate. "I'm sure. I'm not going to live like my father. I'm not going to spend the rest of my life afraid. If testifying doesn't put Anastasia away, fine. But at least I'll know I stood up." Sullivan's voice had a note of respect. "Okay. I'll send agents to pick you up. We'll put you in a safe house, take your statement, and start building the case. Vincent, one more thing, yeah? This is brave. Stupid, maybe, but brave." Vincent almost smiled. "In my experience, Sully, there's not much difference." Within 3 hours, 2 FBI agents arrived at Vincent's apartment. They drove him to a safe house in Queens, a nondescript building where he'd stay while giving his testimony. Over the next 2 days, Vincent told federal prosecutors everything. The date and time of Tony Schott's visit, the exact words of the extortion demand, the threat about accidents, the shooting. It was enough to get a warrant for Tony Schott's arrest on federal extortion charges. On March 7, 1952, FBI agents arrested Anthony Coppola outside his home in Bensonhurst. It made the front page of every newspaper in New York. And Albert Anastasia, reading the news in his Mulberry Street social club, smiled that cold smile and made a phone call. Tony Schott's was smart enough to keep his mouth shut. His lawyer, a mob attorney named Morton Feldman, got him released on $50,000 bail within 24 hours. The federal prosecutors had Vincent's testimony, but they needed more. They needed evidence, corroboration, something that would make the charges stick. What they had was one witness and a lot of bullet holes. Tony Schott's walked out of the federal courthouse in Manhattan and went straight to Mulberry Street. Anastasia was waiting. "You tell them anything?" Tony Schott's shook his head. "Not a word, boss." "Good. Now here's what's going to happen. That case is going to disappear. I've got 3 judges who owe me favors and a federal prosecutor who likes money more than justice. By next month, those charges will be dropped for lack of evidence. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell." But Vincent DeLuca, he's a different problem. Anastasia stood up and walked to the window. He'd been thinking about Vincent for days, and he'd come to a conclusion. Vincent DeLuca wasn't just a businessman who refused to pay. He was a symbol, a man who'd stood up to the mob and lived to tell about it. If word got out that you could say no to Albert Anastasia, if other business owners thought they could refuse protection money and run to the FBI, the entire system would collapse. Vincent DeLuca had to die, not as revenge, but as a message. But Anastasia was smart. He knew that killing Vincent now, while the FBI had him in protective custody, would be impossible and would prove the federal case. So Anastasia waited. Vincent spent 3 weeks in the FBI safe house. He testified before a grand jury, provided detailed statements, worked with prosecutors to build the case. But slowly, he watched it fall apart. Witnesses who'd been at the Stardust the night of the shooting suddenly couldn't remember seeing anything. The gun shop owner, who might have sold the Thompson to mob associates, developed amnesia. Even Detective Morello, the cop who'd been sympathetic at the scene, told prosecutors he couldn't confirm Vincent's version of events. The fix was in. On March 28, 1952, a federal judge dismissed the charges against Tony Schott's, citing insufficient evidence. James Sullivan delivered the news to Vincent personally. "I'm sorry. We tried." Vincent nodded. He'd expected this. "So what now?" Sullivan pulled out a folder. "Witness protection. We can give you a new name, new identity, relocate you to another state. California, maybe. Arizona. Somewhere Anastasia's people won't find you. You'll have to leave everything behind, your business, your family, your friends. But you'll be alive." Vincent thought about that. A new life in California, a fake name, looking over his shoulder for the rest of his days, waiting for the bullet that might never come but might always come. That's not a life, Sully. It's a prison without bars. Then what do you want to do? Vincent looked his old friend in the eye. "I want to go home." Sullivan shook his head. "That's suicide. Anastasia won't let this go. You embarrassed him. You cost him money. You challenged his authority. If you go back to New York, you're a dead man." "Maybe," Vincent said, "but I'd rather die as Vincent DeLuca than live as someone else." Sullivan tried to argue, but Vincent's mind was made up. Against FBI advice, Vincent DeLuca returned to Greenpoint on April 1, 1952. He moved back into his apartment. He started looking for work. He didn't reopen the Stardust Club. The building sat empty, its windows still broken, a monument to the night he'd said no. For 2 months, nothing happened. Vincent got a job as a construction foreman, worked honest hours, came home, lived quietly. He didn't go to nightclubs. He didn't socialize. He kept to himself. And every day, he waited for the knock on the door, the car following him, the moment when Anastasia's patience would run out. The hit came on June 12, 1952, but not the way anyone expected. Vincent was walking home from work, crossing through McCarran Park at dusk. The park was mostly empty, just a few kids playing baseball in the distance. Vincent took the path he always took, the shortcut that led to his street. He didn't see the man sitting on the bench until he walked past. "Hey, Vincent." Vincent turned. The man on the bench was older, maybe 60, wearing a simple brown suit. His face was weathered but kind. Vincent didn't recognize him. "Do I know you?" The man smiled. "No, but I know you. My name's Giuseppe Moretti. I'm a friend of your father's. We worked together in Red Hook years ago." Vincent relaxed slightly. His father had passed away 3 years earlier, but many of his old friends still lived in the neighborhood. "Giuseppe, yeah, my dad mentioned you. How've you been?" "Good, good. Listen, I heard about your trouble with the club. That's a damn shame. What happened to honest businessmen in this city, huh?" Vincent shrugged. "It is what it is." Giuseppe stood up slowly, like his joints ached. "You know, your father was a good man, always paid his debts, always kept his word. You're like him." Vincent started to thank him, but something in Giuseppe's eyes changed. The kindness disappeared, replaced by something cold and final. "But your father, he knew when to bend. You don't." Giuseppe's hand came up from his coat pocket holding a .38 revolver. Vincent barely had time to register what was happening before Giuseppe fired twice. Both shots hit Vincent in the chest. He fell backward onto the park path, blood spreading across his shirt. Giuseppe stood over him for a moment. "Nothing personal, kid. But you can't say no to Albert." Vincent DeLuca died in McCarran Park at 7:23 p.m. on June 12, 1952. He was 33 years old. The police investigation went nowhere. Giuseppe Moretti disappeared. No witnesses came forward. The newspapers ran a small story on page 7. Greenpoint man killed in park, motive unknown. Only a few people understood what had really happened. Vincent DeLuca had tried to prove you could succeed in New York without the mob. He'd tried to build something clean in a dirty city. And if you like this video, remember to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. And for that, he'd paid the ultimate price. Albert Anastasia never spoke about Vincent DeLuca publicly, but the message was clear. You don't say no, you don't go to the FBI, you don't challenge the system, and if you do, you die. The Stardust Club sat empty for 2 years before the city condemned it. Eventually, it was torn down. Today, there's an apartment building on Franklin Street where Vincent's dream once stood. No plaque, no memorial, nothing to indicate what happened there. But in Greenpoint, old-timers still tell the story. They tell it to their kids and grandkids. The story of the man who said no to Albert Anastasia. Some people say Vincent DeLuca was brave. Some say he was stupid. Some say he was both. Maybe the truth is simpler. Vincent DeLuca was a man who believed in something the mob could never understand. That principle matters more than survival, that some things are worth dying for, and that saying no, even when it costs you everything, is the only way to stay human in an inhuman world. He lost his club. He lost his life. But he never bowed down. And in a city where everyone bent the knee, maybe that was its own kind of victory.